Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is ZANE and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 11 waiver wire targets for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, we're going to be talking about players at a variety of different positions, the best available running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, kickers, and defenses going into Week 11. Players who can immediately start for your team and help you capture a victory and get you one step closer to capturing a 2024 fantasy football championship. And with many of us missing players going into Week 11 due to the 4 teams on bye, the Carolina Panthers, the Arizona Cardinals, the Giants, and of course the Buccaneers all having their bye week this week. And not only that, with all the players that continue to miss time due to injury, many of our rosters are relatively thin. So we're going to address this by getting some positional needs via the waiver wire. I'll talk about players that are all being rostered in less than 50% of leagues. If there is someone in your league that is rostered in more than 50% and still available, they should already be addressed and potentially picked up as the #1 priority going into this week. Now, before I get into talking about these players, if you're looking for my specific thoughts on an individual player, you can travel down to the description of the video, check out the timestamps down there. Besides that, of course, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We're live streaming every single day on the channel, making daily content. Later tonight, after my Los Angeles Rams take on the Miami Dolphins, I will be live streaming here on the channel. So if you have any questions in regards to Week 11 waiver wires, trade targets, potential starter sits, be sure to swing on by. Thank you very much for all the support. And at the end of today's episode, I will be putting together a couple entries via Underdog. If you guys haven't checked them out, there's a link down in the description. At this current moment in time, you can tail tonight's picks in regards to the game between the Rams and the Dolphins by using code Andrew, making that first time deposit minimum of $10. You'll be able to claim the first time deposit offer. You'll get my rankings sent to you from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings by position, by tier, all encompassing half PPR and full PPR. For those of you who are wondering if you're eligible to take advantage of the opportunity, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. And if in fact you are not eligible by your location, or if you've used a code or somebody else's code in the past, you can always check out the Patreon links also down in the description. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, so let's go ahead and begin with the running back conversation with Jaylen Warren. This is quite literally the only player this entire video that I'm going to express as a potential pickup that needs to be on roster, that is rostered in over 50% of Yahoo or Sleeper leagues. This is the only player in this overall category. And the only reason I wanted to mention him is because yesterday Najee Harris did sustain an injury. He left the game and eventually returned. Najee Harris has never missed a game in his career due to an injury. That being said, if in fact there's going to be a situation in which Jaylen Warren is going to get himself more utilization within his offense and is going to look like the better overall running back option like he did yesterday, 14 carries for 66 yards, 2 targets, 2 receptions, 29 receiving yards, 8.5 half PPR fantasy points. If we're going to be in a situation in which Najee Harris may be a little bit slow, maybe dealing with that injury, Jaylen Warren will certainly be of value. Now, the thumbnail of today's episode, and probably the most valuable potential prospect of this entire conversation, at the running back position, is Audric Estime, rookie running back of the Denver Broncos. Now, as we saw yesterday, Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin have both been phased out of this offense in terms of the rushing category. The game started off with Jaleel McLaughlin being the starting running back. Henceforth, after we saw Javonte Williams get into the mix early and play on third downs. But throughout the entire game, we didn't see any sort of rushing opportunity go in the direction of Javonte Williams. He had 1 rushing attempt the entire game. Therefore, going forward, from what Audric Estime presented yesterday, with his 14 total rushing attempts for 53 rushing yards, thus far this season, he's averaging 5.1 yards per carry on average, which he's played incredibly well. We've heard earlier today, based on what Sean Payton said, overall workload for Audric Estime and his performance yesterday was promising in that he's going to get more work going forward. In terms of the overall snap counts out of this backfield in yesterday's game against the Kansas City Chiefs, a very good run-stopping defense, might I add. The overall backfield snaps were Audric Estime with 26, Javonte Williams with 16, and Jaleel McLaughlin with 7. So pretty much, Audric Estime handled 53% of the overall snaps. He had the vast majority, over 80% of the rushing attempts out of this backfield. And going forward, if he's going to get himself more utilization on third down, great. He didn't play a single down on third, which obviously speaks volumes as to what his overall potential is in terms of upside. If he's not going to be implicated to be the receiving back of this team, he is pretty much just a Raheem Mostert. What I mean by that is that he is 100% contingent on rushing yards and rushing touchdowns in order to be relevant within a given week, and doesn't have much more upside outside of that. Even with that being said, he is still the clear and away running back of this team and is going to get himself the vast majority of rushing attempts going forward, which certainly has value and is why I'm going to go ahead and suggest him as the #2. And probably for many of us, he is the most valuable running back available in quite a while in our waiver wire conversation. #3 is Gus Edwards, running back of the Los Angeles Chargers. Just recently came off of the IR, was activated. Kamani Vidal was inactivated for the game. So going forward, it is very much so clear that it is going to be the Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins show. Now, in regards to the overall workload of opportunity, J.K. Dobbins is still clear and away the #1. Played 38 snaps in comparison to Gus Edwards' 14. Now, despite that, of course, Gus Edwards was highly efficient, 5.5 fantasy points, but 10 carries for 55 rushing yards. Very efficient in his overall opportunity share. easily should have had himself a rushing touchdown, if not J.K. Dobbins, but unfortunately, for some reason, they decided to go ahead and hand off the ball to Hassan Haskins for a rushing touchdown. Not only that, we did see a play in which Justin Herbert kept the ball and scored in a rushing touchdown. If those potential attempts go in the direction of J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards in the future, which they probably will, a player that is currently rostered at only 17% of Yahoo leagues, 19% of sleeper leagues, is not only the handcuff to J.K. Dobbins, but has an opportunity to have himself individual value and be a startable option going forward in an advantageous matchup in which we, of course, continue to see the Los Angeles Chargers stacking together victories and, imposing their will via the run game. Number 4 is Cam Akers. Now, yesterday, throughout the game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, obviously the offense as a whole was looking terrible, but the running game was quite efficient. Now, midway through that game, we did in fact see Aaron Jones sustain a rib cartilage injury. Like we've talked about in the past, a rib cartilage injury is mainly something that is a pain threshold. Whether or not you can fight through the pain and continue to play is up to the player individually. We've seen earlier this season, Jaden Daniels come back within a week and play against the Chicago Bears after sustaining a very similar injury. In the past, we've seen running backs deal with this injury and miss multiple weeks due to it. If there's going to be a situation in which Aaron Jones is not going to be able to play with this injury, Cam Akers is the next man up based on his overall opportunity share in the last 2 games. He has cleared away the number 2 and has taken over that spot in comparison with Ty Chandler has presented earlier this season. So Cam Akers would be the guy currently only rostered in 14% of Yahoo leagues, 19% of sleeper leagues, would be the handcuff to Aaron Jones if in fact he is going to miss any instance of time going forward. Number 5 is Khalil Herbert. Now, my only concern about Khalil Herbert is that earlier today, the Bengals signed Gary Brightwell and they did work out Leonard Fournette. Now, I don't know if that's because something happened to Khalil Herbert or if that's something that happened to Chase Brown, but it looks like they're just trying to build more running back depth because they don't trust Khalil Herbert in this circumstance, even though they just most recently traded for him. In time, we'll get a clear understanding as to why, in fact, they are signing or working out these other running backs, but in the case of Khalil Herbert, again, he is still a talented young running back. He is still on his rookie deal. They traded for him. He is expected to potentially be the RB2. And from what we have seen out of Zach Moss over the course of weeks 5 through 8, throughout that span of time, Zach Moss had 12, 7, 9, and 9 touches in those individual games. So if there's going to be a situation in which Chase Brown is going to get a little bit of his workload taken away from him, especially coming off of the last 2 consecutive games of 32 and 22 touches, which again is not very much so sustainable for the kind of running back he is, going forward, if we're going to be in a situation in which Khalil Herbert is exposed to more opportunity, which should eventually happen, as long as these new running backs that are working out and being signed to the team aren't implicated at taking away touches from Khalil Herbert, we have no issue at all, and he should be picked up going forward. Number 6 in our final running back dimension is Trey Benson. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, we've seen far more usage from Trey Benson than from weeks prior. In the last 2 games, has played 28 and 31% of the offensive snaps, has scored 12.0 and 9.7 fantasy points. In terms of his overall efficiency running the ball has been fantastic and continues to get himself more opportunity on the ground and through the air. Now going forward, not only is he the primary handcuff to James Conner, but as we slowly approach the fantasy playoffs, we have to remember the Cardinals' schedule is elite. They are taking on the New England Patriots, the Carolina Panthers, and the Los Angeles Rams in weeks 15 through 17, the 3 fantasy playoff games. Therefore, if there is an instance in time in which James Conner is going to miss due to an injury, or potentially the Arizona Cardinals continue to barrel through these teams, the expectation is that Trey Benson can still be fantasy relevant on his own accord, while also potentially having the even greater upside in the event in which James Conner is to miss time. He is the most valuable handcuff that you could possibly ask for. As of right now, only rostered in 18% of Yahoo leagues, 25% of sleeper formats. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the wide receiver conversation with our number 1. We have Rashod Bateman. Look, we've talked about him ad nauseum in the past, but if in fact he is still available, because I was surprised to see he's only rostered in 29% of Yahoo leagues, 32% of sleeper leagues. He's a wide receiver coming off of another great performance, but he has had himself 4 of the last 6 games consisting of 9 or more fantasy points in a half PPR. He has scored 4 touchdowns in the last 8 games with the Baltimore Ravens offense. And as long as Deontay Johnson's role is slow to expand going forward with him still trying to learn this offense, as long as there's a slow exposure to opportunity for Deontay Johnson, Rashod Bateman should still be a primary option within this offense that continues to get themselves into shootouts, primarily because their secondary and their defense isn't great enough to be able to stop them from being in those overall situations. So within the upcoming matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, we're expecting another shootout. And in that instance, Rashod Bateman has been extremely valuable and certainly a security blanket for Lamar Jackson on many instances. Now, speaking of the Pittsburgh Steelers, let's talk about Mike Williams. Now, we talked about Mike Williams last week. We talked about him yesterday. I didn't expect him to play at all. And even though he did play, he played 9 total snaps and had 1 target. Luckily for him, and for those of you who played him, he had 1 reception for 32 yards and a receiving touchdown and saved his entire game on a buzzer beater play as the final play of the Steelers drive in order to put them ahead and capture a victory against the Washington Commanders. Now, going forward into week 11, he'll probably still be limited in terms of his overall usage. Having to learn the offense is not easy for any wide receiver. We have seen that over the course of this entire season with guys like Deontay Johnson, Amari Cooper, and DeAndre Hopkins. So Mike Williams is another one of these veteran wide receivers that, again, is going to have to get himself more and more opportunity and will probably be at a full exposure to opportunity by the time we get to week 12 rather than week 11. But still, if you were looking towards the future, an absolute pickup. Number 3, we have Elijah Moore. Now, again, if in fact Cedric Tillman and or Jerry Jeudy aren't already rostered in your leagues, those should be the number 1 and 2 options going into this week. Please do yourself a favor and roster them. But in the event in which they are rostered already, Elijah Moore is still a great option. Elijah Moore in the last 2 games that he played prior to the bye week, 12 in 9 targets. The opportunity is going to continue to be there as Jameis Winston is a gunslinging quarterback that is going to continue to throw the ball 40 plus times per game. And if he continues to support the idea of throwing the ball towards Elijah Moore as a security blanket, outside of guys like Cedric Tillman, Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku, of course, Elijah Moore will continue to have value rest of the way as the team will be in negative game scripts in throwing for the vast majority of games. Number 4, we have Alec Pierce. Look, as long as Michael Pittman Jr. is still dealing with his back injury, which again, earlier this season, about a month ago, we talked about this. Michael Pittman Jr. was almost put on the injured reserve because of that injury. Now, if in fact we're going to be in a situation in which the Indianapolis Colts are trending in the wrong direction, continuing to stack up losses, and Michael Pittman Jr. may consider, let me just have surgery and let me just take the rest of the season off, there's even more opportunity for Alec Pierce going forward. With Joe Flacco, a gunslinging quarterback himself, you would assume that the receiving targets like Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, AD Mitchell are going to continue to be of value in the service for us for fantasy. Again, another solid week for Alec Pierce here. Number 5, we have Marquez Valdes-Scantling. No, I could not fit his full name, but hey, the fact of the matter is he is pretty much the Rashid Shaheed of this offense going forward. Even though he only had 3 targets, he still got himself 2 receptions, 109 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, 24.4 half PPR fantasy points, the second highest scoring wide receiver of the week, only behind Jamar Chase. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, again, is going to be the deep receiving threat. And like we've seen all season long, Derek Carr very much so relies upon that with Rashid Shaheed. And considering he is absent and probably out for the remainder of the season, we're going to lean in the direction of Marquez Valdes-Scantling as that kind of 50-50 ball. Could potentially make his entire fantasy week with one individual play, or could be a dud, but that's the risk that we're willing to take. The final option within the top 6 is Adam Thielen. Again, he has yet to play since week 4. So if we're going to be in a situation in which Adam Thielen potentially returns this week, or after their bye week, because again, they are on a bye this week, along with the Giants, the Buccaneers, and of course the Cardinals, next week, prepare for Adam Thielen to return from weeks 12 through 17 with Bryce Young. If you guys remember last season, a lot of the overall damage that Adam Thielen did against defenses was with Bryce Young. So hopefully that overall rapport and that connection can continue to rebuild, and he could be something of value in the future. Just throw him in your IR slot because, again, he is still on the IR technically and has not yet returned from his 21-day practice window. All right, let's move on to a couple more players that I just wanted to go ahead and throw out. Mack Hollins, AD Mitchell, and John Mechie. These are 3 players that, again, are probably available. In terms of their overall roster sit percentage on Yahoo, it's 1%, 6%, and 1%. Again, in the event in which we have Mack Hollins playing another game in the absence of Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper, again, Mack Hollins in the last 2 games, 9 targets, 9 receptions, 116 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. He's averaging 11 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks and a half PPR. AD Mitchell coming off a week of 6 targets, 6 catches, 71, over 10 fantasy points. If, in fact, we see another week in which we have Michael Pittman Jr. missing, anticipate that AD Mitchell will continue to get himself more opportunity. And John Mechie, who again, even though his career has been slow to start, he has an opportunity here in the absence of Stephon Diggs to truly be valuable going forward. Now, when we go ahead and put Nico Collins back into the equation, it could eliminate John Mechie outright. But going forward, we're going to hope that this offense wants to continue to utilize 11 personnel, 1 tight end, 1 running back, 3 wide receiver sets. And if in fact they're going to do so, John Mechie could be implicated to playing on the field with guys like Nico Collins and Tank Dell, which could provide him value in the future. All right, let's move on to the tight end conversation. Let's begin with our number 1, JONNU Smith, who you should be picking up if in fact he is available prior to tonight's game. Currently only rostered in 25% of Yahoo leagues, 35% of sleeper leagues. If you're looking for a pivoting option in the flex position for the one and only Tyreek Hill, in the event in which he does not play tonight, JONNU Smith could be that guy. So again, you can pick him up. You can get it, the advantage of him, being on roster for you first and foremost, but then also having him available for next week taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. The Las Vegas Raiders in week 11, they are the 5th best matchup at the tight end position. They're allowing over 12 fantasy points per game and a half PPR to opposing tight ends thus far this season. Therefore, JONNU Smith, again, a very valuable prospect and should be the #1 pickup at the tight end conversation, assuming he is not picked up tonight prior to the game. Then we have Zach Ertz, our number 2. Look, Zach Ertz, even though he's coming off of a game in which he only put up 5 fantasy points, it's another consecutive week in which we're getting a lot of targets going in his direction. As long as that continues to be the case, again, he has a really short week taking on the Eagles on Thursday night. Obviously, a rival matchup against his former organization should be fun. But again, short week Thursday Night Football, we would anticipate that Zach Ertz should be relatively valuable, only rostered in 33% of Yahoo leagues. Then we have Dawson Knox. Now, we know that Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta, both these tight ends, sustained injuries yesterday. Obviously, Sam Laporta doesn't really have a backup with Brock Wright. I wouldn't really trust starting him every week, but Dawson Knox has proven in the past that he could be a tight end 1 in fantasy football. If we're going to be in a situation in which Dalton Kincaid misses time due to this knee injury, Dawson Knox, again, only rostered in 1% of Yahoo leagues, 4% of sleeper leagues, with all the injuries that have taken place to the Bills receiving core, with, of course, Keon Coleman, Amari Cooper dealing with injury, Dawson Knox would step up and, of course, certainly immediately be of value within the top 16 tight end conversation this week. Then we have Will Dissly, who, again, continues to get himself more and more opportunity. In terms of targets in the last 4 games, 11, 7, 3, and 6. Continues to get himself solid opportunity. Takes on the Bengals this week, which is the 6th best matchup at the position, allowing over 12 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And then we have Josh Oliver, who has really low-key been a sleeper option at the tight end position, rostered in 0% of Yahoo and sleeper leagues, but in the last 3 games has put up 10, 14.3, and 7.2. Despite the fact that we have seen an active TJ Hawkinson, Josh Oliver continues to be one of the safety blankets within this offense as they're running a lot of 12 personnel. So going forward, in the event in which Josh Oliver, maybe you're playing in a super deep league and he is your best available option going into the week, why not pick him up and potentially start him? Our number 6, we have Jatavion Sanders, who is going on bye week. Again, that is why he is primarily number 6. He has been really valuable as of late. But Jatavion Sanders, along with Theo Johnson, both these tight ends are going on bye. If you're looking towards the fantasy playoffs, you could potentially pick them up and kind of prepare for them potentially starting for you in those overall instances. But as of right now, again, both of them going into bye week doesn't make them the most enticing potential pickups in this current circumstance. Let's move on to quarterback. Bo Nix is our number 1. Again, we've talked about Bo Nix a lot this season, but he has an opportunity of taking on the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons have allowed 2 or more touchdowns to 8 of the last 9 quarterbacks they have faced. I mean, again, this is not going to be a difficult matchup. Even though Bo Nix yesterday did take on a difficult matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, he still had 215 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns on a 73% passing completion percentage. I expect him to impose his will against the Atlanta Falcons defense. Then we have our number 2, Russell Wilson, who, even though he is coming off of a performance of a 50% passing completion percentage, 3 passing touchdowns, over 18 fantasy points, has an opportunity this week of taking on the Baltimore Ravens. They are the 3rd best matchup at the position, in allowing over 16.5 fantasy points per game just off of passing statistics isolated. The Ravens have allowed 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks that they have faced to score 2 or more touchdowns. Therefore, Russell Wilson is the next man up to have himself another incredible performance against that secondary that is struggling this season. Then we have Jameis Winston, who again continues to sling the ball. Coming off of the bye week, Kevin Stefanski already confirmed that he is going to be the starter. They're taking on the Saints. Again, this is a revenge game against his former team. And again, that Saints secondary has been dealing with a lot of injuries. Of course, they traded away Marshawn Lattimore. It should present a huge opportunity for Jameis Winston to tear apart this secondary and this defense and exact some revenge taking on the New Orleans Saints. Then we have Drake May, our number 4. Look, what Drake May has done thus far this season has been very impressive in comparison to other quarterbacks, especially when you consider what has surrounded him in terms of talent as his offensive line, running backs, and receivers. But what really makes Drake May a valuable prospect is that since week 6 in the healthy games he has played, he's averaging 44 rushing yards per game. So if we're going to get an additional 4 fantasy points, pretty much a touchdown's worth of points, just off of rushing statistics isolated, I still believe that going up against the Rams this week, he can be valuable enough in a 2-quarterback setting in which he could be a startable option within the upcoming matchup. Then we have Derek Carr as our number 5, which again, when you take on the Browns have allowed 2 or more passing touchdowns in each of the last 4 games to opposing quarterbacks. So again, we would assume as the 7th best matchup, Derek Carr should be able to take advantage of it. with MVS back into the conversation. The deep ball is back for Derek Carr, and of course, his value continues to grow within the conversation. Then we have Joe Flacco, who again likes to throw interceptions, but taking on the Jets is going to probably still be in a situation in which he's going to score himself 2 touchdowns. I would anticipate that, but the turnovers, again, very much so volatile, which could hurt his overall upside for success. Therefore, we put him at number 6. Let's move on to kickers and defense to close out today's video in regards to potential waiver wire pickups. I begin with our number 1, John Parker Romo, which we had ranked yesterday morning because, again, in the absence of Will Reichard, you know, the Minnesota Vikings are going to continue to score. Now, I didn't expect them to only score field goals yesterday, but hey, we'll take it. John Parker Romo had 13 fantasy points yesterday. Now, again, he could have had an extra 2 more field goals if it wasn't for the fact that, of course, unfortunately, Sam Darnold turned over the ball twice in the red zone. But again, going into this week and going forward with Will Reichard on the injured reserve, you got to remember, Will Reichard prior to his injury was averaging 9.5 fantasy points per game. So again, the Vikings, whoever their kicker is still going to be of value, and John Parker Romo has already presented that he's going to be of future value going forward. Matt Gay, again, I don't know why. I mentioned him last week this time. 13% rostered on Yahoo. That number did not move a singular percent. He has scored 9, 10, 8, 12, 9, 10, 8. He has scored 8+ fantasy points in 7 straight games, and in every single one of those games has had himself 2 or more field goals. Therefore, again, pick him up and play him. Zane Gonzalez, the final player. Again, considering we have a Thursday night matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Washington Commanders, it is a short week. There is a potential in which Austin Seibert does not return. In the event in which he doesn't, again, you got to remember, Austin Seibert had scored 2 or more field goals in 7 of the last 8 games he played. Zane Gonzalez, in his absence, scored 11 fantasy points yesterday. So again, we would assume that Zane Gonzalez could be a 10+ fantasy point product within Thursday's matchup against the Eagles. Then we move on to defensive conversation. The Green Bay Packers taking on the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears have been terrible. They cannot score offensively. Defenses against the Chicago Bears in the last 2 weeks of fantasy, 12 and 16 points. Fire up your Packers defense. Then we move on to the Houston Texans, who take on, of course, the Dallas Cowboys. Whether it is Cooper Rush or Trey Lance, it doesn't matter. We just saw the Eagles defense put up 20 fantasy points. So we would imagine that, of course, the Houston Texans defense, who has scored 12, 9, 10, 2, and 10, so over 9 fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games, we would assume that defense that caused 5 interceptions for Jared Goff. And again, Jared Goff was on an all-time legendary streak of games in which he had 80+% passing completion percentage, but then he walked into the buzzsaw of the Houston Texans defense, which, of course, Cooper Rush and Trey Lance, whoever ends up starting, is going to have to walk into this week. Then we have the Miami Dolphins taking on the Raiders. I don't know who's going to be playing quarterback for the Raiders. If it's Desmond Ridder, it makes it an even better start. Otherwise, if it's Gardner Minshew, regardless, the Raiders have allowed the following fantasy points to opposing defenses since week 4. 11, 16, 13, 17, 10, and 8. They've allowed over 8 fantasy points every single game in the last 6 contests against opposing defenses. Therefore, Miami Dolphins an automatic pickup and play in this circumstance. Okay, with this all covered, I want to thank you guys for watching. We're going to go ahead and close out today's episode by putting together a couple entries via Underdog for tonight's game between the Los Angeles Rams and the Miami Dolphins. Let's check that out right now. All right, so let's go ahead and first and foremost begin with Devon Achane receptions. 4.5 is an easy cakewalk, primarily because in the 4 games in which we have seen Devon Achane play with Tua Tagovailoa this season, every single game has consisted of 6 or more receptions and 7 or more targets. Therefore, I think you can either take one of 2 things. You can either take his higher on total receptions, in which you go to the reception number, and as you can see, the pop-up begins in which you can adjust the overall line. Now, you can take it at 5.5, you can take it at 6.5 receptions. I mean, shoot, you can take it at 7.5 receptions. Your multiplier continues to increase, but I want to take it safe. I will take the 0.7x multiplier, and I will just take 4.5 receptions. Now, you could also, in the same vein, talk about potential 6.5 targets. Again, he has had 7 or more targets every single game with Tua Tagovailoa. But again, this is a little bit sketchier because if there's the event of a game in which he gets himself 6 targets, 5 catches, then of course you'll get clipped on that. I would probably put a slip with 4.5 receptions on one, 6.5 targets on the other, just to play it safe, because there's always the possibility that he gets his 7 targets, but only makes 5 receptions, or maybe even gets only 4 receptions. In those events, again, you might want to diversify in terms of the overall entries that you make. But again, in terms of the overall entries, this is the one that I'm most confident with, considering his exposure to opportunity within the receiving game and the potential in which, of course, we have Tyreek Hill that's not going to play. The only reason that Jalen Waddle currently sits here with no receiving props, kind of associated with him, is because we don't know the overall status of Tyreek Hill going into tonight's game. Still a game time decision. In the event in which Tyreek Hill was going to be absent, they don't want to put numbers here for Jalen Waddle, because you could take a number that's like 47.5 receiving yards. In the absence of Tyreek Hill, if you put $1,000 on it, that's going to hit. So they're playing it relatively safe, which again, we're going to continue to play it relatively safe in this conversation. So I'll go ahead and continue with Kyren Williams anytime touchdown. He has scored a touchdown every single game thus far this season, except for last week. Obviously had himself multiple opportunities on the goal line, got stuffed in those opportunities, but going into tonight's game, both of his starting offensive guards who were out and on the injured reserve are finally returning. Both Steven Avila and Jonah Jackson, their starting offensive guards, are back. Again, this offense is predicated on their offensive guards dominating at the point of attack. Being able to combo block the down linemen and get to the linebackers is exactly what we're going to see tonight. And in the absence of Rob Havenstein, their starting right tackle that has been there for a long time, in the absence of him, again, this is going to be a huge uptick of overall opportunity, considering, again, you have talent back up front and ready to go. Now, in regards to the potential of another player in this conversation, these are my two favorite plays. So I'm going to first and foremost just go ahead, put an entry in here, take this. Now, if I want to potentially add more to these, the other players that I would probably consider throwing into this conversation are just easy plays. Like, I will take higher than 4.5 receptions for Puka Nacua. I think that is a cakewalk in this overall instance. So hear me out here. I went ahead and I just did a little bit more digging. In regards to Puka Nacua, we're going to take higher than the 4.5 receptions. I think, again, if Puka Nacua is not going to have 5 receptions, my Rams are losing tonight. And then we went ahead and threw in Raheem Mostert, 0.5 receptions. In the 3 games in which he has played with a healthy Tua Tagovailoa, back in week 1, in the most 2 recent weeks, he's had 2 receptions in each of those games. Again, Tua Tagovailoa loves to dump off the ball to his running backs because of his offensive line not being able to hold. So again, 2 receptions each of the last 3 weeks. I think 0.5 receptions is an easy take in this circumstance. This is another play that I'm going to make going into tonight's game. Again, these 4 legs, again, still in conjunction with a Kyren Williams touchdown, Devon Achane receptions. We'll take the receptions there and another reception there, and we're good to go. All right, this is going to cover it in regards to my entries going into tonight's game. Again, I'll be back later tonight after the game concludes to answer questions via live stream. If you guys have any questions, be sure to swing on by. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and until tomorrow's video in which we talk about running back rankings for Week 11, I'll see you guys. Peace.